Hello there, guys. Welcome back to Two Sisters and a TV. Today's episode is I'm going to dive right off into it. It's going to be on a TV show, another one of those that was on for a very long time, another one that I enjoyed growing up, and one that impacted a lot of people's lives in different ways. And that TV show is Soultrain. Now, Soultrain, of course, very groundbreaking show. Groundbreaking when it came to a lot of things. It was the first time that you had a lot of the musical artists who performed on Soultrain had a platform to be able to perform on their show and to get their music displayed nationally. It made the careers of a lot of artists. Did a lot for the dancers who were on the show. Did a lot for the host himself, Don Cornelius. Did a lot for a sense of pride within the African American community. It also ended up becoming a mainstream TV show. More on all of that gradually as we chug along here today. But Soultrain, of course, was the brainchild of Don Cornelius. Now, Don Cornelius had a very eventful life before Soultrain came into being. He'd been in the military. He had been an insurance salesman. He had been a news reporter, a disc jockey. How he got into being a disc jockey was one day a colleague told him that he had a really good speaking voice. And so he was selling insurance at the time. So he took that compliment and decided to invest in a 3-month broadcasting course. So he learned all the ins and outs of broadcasting. And after that, he became a DJ. And as a result of becoming a DJ and taking the broadcasting course, he began to realize and get the idea that the field was wide open for a show that would showcase Black entertainment. Kind of like American Bandstand had been for so many years. Was American Bandstand had been on the air since 1952. Dick Clark took over as hosting in 1957. And American Bandstand, of course, was, that was really a fixture within not only television, but a fixture within music, a fixture amongst teenagers. And so he felt that there was the same avenue that could be done with African American artists, African American dancers. Of course, American Bandstand, had African American artists on the show. They would go on to have African American dancers on the show. But, they basically focused on the really popular acts of the time. They had Sam Cooke. They had all the Motown acts. They had James Brown, Chuck Berry. But there were a lot of not so popular artists who never made American Bandstand because of the fact that they were not popular enough. They weren't mainstream. So that was where Don Cornelius really began to get his inspiration from for doing a TV show where they could have that particular focus. They could have that exposure. So he decided to put his own money into the idea of Soultrain. Now, long story short, Soultrain did come to fruition in 1970. It made its debut in Chicago. It was a local show. And I know that, Don began to acquire friends within the music industry. I know that he depended upon his contacts a lot in the beginning when Soultrain was in Chicago. He depended upon Eddie Kendricks. Not Eddie Kendricks, I'm trying to say Curtis Mayfield quite a bit, the OJs, and other people that he knew within the industry. So Soultrain made its debut that fall of 1970, and it did very well, actually. However, Don had a bigger vision for the show. He wanted it to become a national TV show. And so that came into fruition the following year. It made its debut in syndication in October of 1971. It was originally shown in 7 major cities. It was only in 7 markets that very first season. The first episode featured Gladys Knight and the Pips, Eddie Kendrick. That's where I got Eddie Kendricks from when I mentioned him a minute ago. Eddie Kendricks had just left the Temptations to embark on a solo career. So he was on the first episode of Soultrain, as were as Honeycomb, who had a big hit that year with the Want ads, and Bobby Hutton. So Soul Train made its first episode, made its debut that fall, struggled initially in the ratings, struggled with acquiring artists to appear on the show. Don actually had to bring in, on occasion, he had to bring in artists who were popular more so in the 60s, like Martha Reeves and the Vandellas. And he had to bring in the Intruders. So he used the talent that he could get, what he could acquire. And it was definitely not very easy. There were sponsors who really didn't want to back Soultrain because they just kind of didn't have a lot of confidence in it. You know how it is when something is starting off brand new. Everything that's brand new is not a success overnight. It takes some time to build a rapport, to build an audience, to build a reputation, to build an image. So it definitely took some time. But Don was very committed to Soultrain, very committed to his vision for Soultrain. He was very tenacious. He had a lot of guts, and he was determined to make this show a success. So he did whatever he had to do. He booked the talent that he could get, and he made sure that this was going to be a success. Now, by 1972, when Soultrain was back to begin its second season, they were able to acquire for the first episode Ike and Tina Turner, which was a big deal. Ike and Tina Turner were legends within the music industry. They'd opened for the Rolling Stones. They had their own career that had been in place since the 50s. So with the presence of Ike and Tina Turner, then other artists began to really kind of notice Soultrain. They wanted to jump on the bandwagon and perform on the show as well. Also, 1972, 1973, that period, you began to see the people like the Temptations and Aretha Franklin, the Supremes, and the list has continued to increase over time. So Soul Train by the 1972-73 season had jumped from 7 markets to 25. So it was definitely on an up climb. It was definitely making a lot of progress. Like I said, you had the really big artists of the day who were on the show, but you also had those artists that really were unheard of that were also on Soul Train. That's what I like about it. You had their music being played. You had them on the show. You had the big, like I said, the big stars like Al Green and Stevie Wonder. But you also had other groups on the show and artists like Billy Paul. And there's another artist I was thinking of that I cannot remember, Sylvia, who did Pillow Talk. She was originally with Mickey and Sylvia, but they went their own separate ways, and she had a big hit with the song Pillow Talk in 1973. So you had a lot of different artists begin to come on the show. The dancers, of course, began to make headlines themselves. Now, they didn't make any money. The dancers were not paid for their time or their dancing expertise. They were actually compensated, believe it or not, in chicken. Fried chicken. Yes, ma'am. Don Cornelius and the producers of the show would go out and they'd buy boxes of KFC or Kentucky Fried Chicken. They'd buy those 2-piece boxes for the dancers, and that's how they were paid for their time and for their dancing expertise, which I have mixed feelings about. I think maybe they should have switched it up and maybe done burgers on occasion. And I think that as the show really became very, very successful, which it did later on, I think that the dancers should have been paid financially. Maybe not a whole lot, but I think that they should have definitely gotten some money, for what they brought to the show, because those dancers had a lot to do with the success of the show. The dancers, if you look at especially the early seasons of Soul Train, those dancers were phenomenal. I mean, they were really killing it on Soul Train. And a lot of them were being recognized, in the community throughout LA, because of course, as I said, Soul Train began in Chicago, but of course it moved to Los Angeles. And so a lot of the kids were being recognized within the community, and some, of course, were, kind of being harassed and being targeted, out of jealousy because they were on TV. But again, the dancers enjoyed being on Soul Train. They enjoyed doing it. Don Cornelius, not the easiest man to work for. He was very hard on the dancers. There were dancers who danced on both American Bandstand and Soul Train. And it has been said that Dick Clark was a very laid-back guy, very nice guy, easy to work with. Don, on the other hand, very strict. He was known for not being the nicest person. You had to call him Mr. Cornelius. He wouldn't take any other kind of greeting other than that. He would make the dancers dance for hours at a time. They couldn't make mistakes. He was very much a taskmaster when it came to the dancers. He was very hard on them. He expected the best. And by the way, if you want to know more about the history of Soultrain, BET had a series, and of course, I'm always late to stuff. It's just a shame. I am so late to the table on things, especially now. But it's called, I believe, American Soul. It's about the beginnings of Soultrain. Now, it ran for a couple of years on BET, then all of a sudden production stopped, which it remains to be seen if American Soul will pick back up and resume. I might even have the name wrong. I hope that I do not. But Google it and you can look it up and find out exactly if I have the right name or not, which I hope I do. But I've seen some clips, and it detailed exactly how Don was behind the scenes. And I know there was one clip in particular where there were a couple of girls who were, because the dancers didn't get along very well sometimes. And that's how people are. There was competition, who was getting the most camera time, who got to do the scramble board. So it wasn't like it was just, all harmonious. Everyone was getting along very well. No, there was definitely competition. So in the scene, these two girls, one girl locked the other in the dressing room. So she got to do the scramble board. And when the girl finally got out of the dressing room, they began to have a heated debate right there in the middle of the dance floor while they were filming a scene. Once Don found out what was going on, everything stopped, and he went down to the dance floor and he went to a conniption. Not only on the two girls themselves, but on everybody else who was dancing. All the dancers were pretty much bawled out by Don. So, he was definitely a very astute businessman, and he didn't have time for games. He didn't want anything or anyone to mess up this show, to mess up the money that he invested in this show. And I don't blame him for that. Maybe there were times that he overdid it, but I get where he was coming from. He did not want this show to fall to pieces over silly little petty conflicts like this. So I get it. But, and of course, all of the hard work and all the determination and drive he put into Soultrain most definitely paid off, because by 1973, 1974, Soultrain was enormously successful. So successful that it was giving American Bandstand a run for its money. American Bandstand was still doing well, of course, but, Soultrain was some very stiff competition, to the point where Dick Clark got the brilliant idea to start a Soultrain of his own, Soul Unlimited. Now, Soul Unlimited was not on for very long. It was on for, I think, just a couple of months. By the way, speaking of Soultrain, there's something else you can check out on YouTube. There is a fantastic, brilliant documentary about Soultrain that was originally shown and made its debut on VH1 some years ago. It is called Soultrain, The Hippest Trip in America. That is a 90-minute documentary. I'm certain about the title of this one, I'm glad to say, because I've seen it several times. It's a 90-minute documentary about all things Soultrain, mainly the Don Cornelius era, how Soultrain came into being in the early years and its intense success. And you can find out more about Soultrain by watching that documentary. I highly, highly recommend it. And that's how I found out about Soul Unlimited, because there was a clip of Soul Unlimited in the documentary. I don't know if there are any episodes available on YouTube or if you can Google anything. I'm not sure of that. I haven't even looked. But Soul Unlimited was exactly like Soultrain, except it seemed very stiff in the clip that was shown in the documentary. There was an African-American host, African-American dancers, African-American music, but it didn't have the vibe that Soul Train did. Soul Train was loose. It was fun. It was hip. It was exciting. It knew how to reel you in. Soul Unlimited did not have that. It was so, like I said, it was just a bad carbon copy. So anyway, Don Cornelius, of course, had a fit. And again, rightfully so. He said that he worked too hard to get Soul Train where it was. And he was not going to let Dick Clark come in and steal that away from him. So not only did Don Cornelius have a fit, but others within the music industry, others who worked on the show, it did not go over very well. And it made Dick Clark come off as pretty much, being a cheap imitator. He pretty much came off as being the bad guy. So he didn't want to make waves. Dick Clark was known for, he could be ruthless. He had a ruthless side to him, but, he didn't want any trouble. He didn't want to make waves. Didn't want to make any enemies. Didn't want to make himself or American Bandstand look bad. So he pulled Soul Unlimited after just a couple of months. I think it was on for like 3 months. And instead, if you look at American Bandstand circa 1974 to 1975, you begin to see more African-American dancers, more African-American artists on the show, more African-American music on the show, which is honestly what he should have done in the first place, instead of trying to create something brand new. Because Soul Train was its own unique entity, and you couldn't duplicate or replicate it. So anyway, in 1974, Soul Train had changed the theme song. They had their own theme song. It was done by the group MFSB, which stood for Mothers, Fathers, Sisters, and Brothers. And the 3 Degrees performed the lyrics or the vocals on the song. The song, of course, was a big hit, did very well on the Billboard charts, both R&B and regular mainstream. They wanted to title the song the Soul Train theme, but Don, being very protective of the Soul Train name, the Soul Train brand, vetoed that idea, which he would years later regret. And so they instead did not name the song after Soul Train. They did not include Soul Train in the name of the song at all. By 1975, Soul Train was really making strides. It had become not only a fixture within African-American homes, but also in a lot of white homes, Asian, Hispanic. People were watching Soul Train like never before. And you began to see white artists appear on Soul Train. In 1975, you had appearances by both Elton John and David Bowie, which showed the strides that the show was making. Soul Train got its first Asian dancer in 1976. Cheryl Song, I'm sure a lot of you remember her. She was the Asian lady with the really long hair. She made her debut in 1976, and she stayed on Soul Train for 14 years until 1990. Also, Soul Train got its first white dancer around 1976 as well, 1977. And you began to, on occasion, hear songs by white artists on Soul Train. Not too often, but sporadically. And of course, over time, that did begin to increase. I remember that in 1976, Dinah, who had her own show, we all know about the Dinah show, especially if you grew up and remember, 70s TV and 70s live. Dinah was a big fixture on daytime TV. Well, in October, she had Don Cornelius on her show, which again shows just what an impact that Soul Train was making. I mean, if you watch 70s TV, 80s TV, particularly sitcoms, you'll hear references to Soul Train. There are references to Soul Train made on Good Times, What's Happening, The Mary Tyler Moore Show, Welcome Back, Kotter. So Soul Train was definitely, making a lot of progress, making a lot of strides. I know that Fred Astaire was watching Soul Train regularly, as were Barbra Streisand. Tom Cruise said publicly years and years later, became a big star, that's how he learned to dance, watching Soul Train. So Soul Train, and on a personal note, Soul Train was must-see TV in my house. I'm the one, as a 4-year-old, believe it or not, true story, I introduced my family to Soul Train. They didn't know anything about it, which is funny because my uncle was teaching at an HBCU. He knew nothing about soul. I guess he was just completely out of the loop, obviously. I guess he was just caught up in his teaching duties, and he wasn't thinking about anything else. He knew nothing about Soul Train, which is still incredulous to me. I found Soul Train by accident one day in 1975. The cartoons had gone off for the day, and usually I would turn the TV off. But I decided to just kind of look around to see what else was on TV. I kind of didn't want to turn the TV off. And so I started turning the channel. These were the days, of course, no remote controls. You had knobs on your TV, and you turned it to the different channels by hand, manually. So I was turning through the channels to see what else was on. I ran across this show with... they were playing, the African American music of the day, and you had all of these African American dancers, and I was just like, well, what is this? So I, stood there, looked at it for about a good 2, 3, 4 minutes, and, I was familiar with the music because this is music that my mother was listening to, so I knew the music. Music was not foreign to me. They were playing the Isley Brothers and Barry White, Last Night and the Pips. They were playing Rufus and Shaka Khan, The Temptations, The Supremes, Smokey Robinson, James Brown. I knew all of these artists. I knew all of their music because this was what was played in my house on a daily basis. So I was like, well, what kind of show is this playing all this music? And then the dancers, they were on there. They were wearing the latest fashions. They had the fros, and their fros were always together. And they had on the platform shoes, both the guys and the girls. And so I discovered that was Soul Train. So I guess the show had been on for maybe about 20 minutes, I want to say. So, of course, I sat down and watched the rest of the episode, and I tuned back in the next week, the next. I watched Soul Train for the next 18 years of my life. I really slowed up with it after Don Cornelius stepped down, more on that later. But, that was the beginning of an 18-year love affair, an 18-year relationship with Soul Train. And of course, I introduced it to the rest of the family. And when my sister was born in 1980, in the 80s, I won't give her birth year. She wouldn't like it. But when she was born, she knew all about Soul Train. She came to the world watching it. So yeah, that was definitely a game changer. But anyway, as we get off into the late 70s, you had the disco era. Don, not a fan of disco. Don Cornelius liked straight R&B, straight soul music. He was not a fan of disco, and later on down the road, he did not care for hip-hop and rap. More on that in a little bit. But he had to keep up with the times. He wanted Soul Train to continue to be successful. He had to stay on top of the times. Now, Bandstand had disco music on its show. And so he had to, relent, and he had to do the same. Now, how Dick Clark felt about disco, I'm not sure. But Don had to go ahead and go along with the flow. By 1976, there was a disco ball on the stage, on the set of Soul Train. Lots of disco music, disco acts. And of course, hey, that's what it was all about. I love disco music. I loved it then. I still love it today. And so, he had to follow along and kind of jump on the bandwagon. Don Cornelius, not very flexible when it came to trends. When he started off, he was super cool. He had the fro. He was impeccably dressed. That never changed. He remained impeccably dressed. But when you start getting off to really changes within music, he was not the most flexible. He reluctantly went along with these changes because he knew he had to keep his show successful. He had to keep his show on point. He had to keep his show on top of these changes. So he reluctantly went along with those changes. But it was not something that he was a very much of a happy camper about. By 1980, 1981, 1982, Soul Train Still super successful, still going along very well. The disco era had ended by 1981. You're getting into a whole different era of music. I think Don was more comfortable with that kind of with that era of music than he was the disco era. Again, all of the big acts musically were on Soultrain. Their music was featured. A lot of the up-and-comers like Janet Jackson, when she released her first album in 1982, she hit Soultrain with that. And of course you had Diana Ross, and then you had, like I said, Patti LaBelle, all of the big names, all the big name artists hit Soultrain. All those who were beginning their careers, like Rick James and Tina Marie, they again made their debut on Soultrain. That was where you started. If you were in the R&B scene, that was where you made your intro, was on Soultrain. Now in 1982, Don had a major brain operation. He'd been having a lot of severe headaches, a lot of difficulty physically. And so we had a major operation, and the operation lasted almost 24 hours. And you could tell that operation kind of took a toll on Don. My mother always said that he never looked the same after he had that operation. And it seemed like after he had that operation, over time, his health continued to decline. You could tell that there was something different about him. Looking back on it, and I couldn't tell back then, but looking back on it, those episodes now, you could see that something. You could tell that something was different. That something was kind of off with Don. But again, Soultrain was continuing to, just very successful on literally every major city in the country was carrying Soultrain. Not to mention smaller towns also were carrying it as well. So many great, amazing performances that I enjoyed watching. I remember watching Casey and the Sunshine Band when I was 5 years old in the kitchen of my grandparents' house. I remember seeing the Silvers perform Hotline. I remember when Rick Dees did Disco Duck. Remember when Chic performed La Freak. I remembered Frankie Valli performing the theme song to Grease. Remember seeing Patti LaBelle, Michael McDonald perform On My Own live. They performed that live. Of course, I remember Elton John and David Bowie. That's how I found out who they were. I didn't know anything about their music, but that's how I was introduced to the two of them. I remember when, speaking of which, the Soultrain line. Let's talk about that. The Soultrain line, one of the most unforgettable aspects of Soultrain. Because that's when first you had the couples. The Soultrain line consisted of couples. That was when the dancers could really strut their stuff individually during that Soultrain line. Of course, later down the road, they replaced the couples going down the Soultrain line to individuals going down it. Pretty much boy, girl. And the Soultrain line to this day is a fixture at weddings and family reunions. It's not a complete gathering unless you do a Soultrain line. We did a Soultrain line. Where was this? I can't remember, but I was in a Soultrain line myself once. I think it was at a birthday party, because you do them at birthday parties too. There was a birthday party. Yes, it was a birthday party. I went to one of my classmates from high school, her 50th birthday party. She had a DJ, and the DJ had videos up as well, in addition to the music that they were playing. Lots of disco, lots of 70s music playing. There were Soultrain clips. Sorry for making a tongue twister there. There were Soultrain clips being played in the background. So we had our own little Soultrain line. And so for the first time, I got to go down a Soultrain line. I went down it twice. And I tell you, there was nothing like having had that experience of going down a Soultrain line. So yeah, Soultrain lines, I tell you, that changed everything. That set Soultrain apart from any other show, that Soultrain line. But yeah, you began to see singular dancers going down the Soultrain line. And speaking of the Soultrain line, I remember when they played Van Halen's Jump in 1984. That was, of course, a big song for Van Halen. The whole album was a big thing for Van Halen. And they did Jump. It's on YouTube. Check it out. Or I think hopefully it's still there. You got to check that out. Hearing Van Halen, and then seeing the dancers dance to it. It was great. Unforgettable. Also, by the 80s, you began to have the music video segment of Soultrain, where there would be a music video played and you would just see the video, And so that, of course, became another fixture on Soultrain. Of course, the dancers changed throughout the years. I mean, you had Jody Watley, who was a dancer. She and another one of the guys, they went on to form Shalimar. And, of course, Jody went on to have her own solo career. She went back on Soultrain to perform, both with Shalimar and as a solo artist. She credited Don Cornelius for really making her career. She did say, again, not everything peaches and cream behind the scenes with the dancers, because she said that when Shalimar first went to perform on Soultrain for the very first time, they got a lot of really mean stares from some of the dancers whom they danced with previously, and there was some jealousy, there was some contention. Also, in regard to Cheryl's song, she didn't have the easiest time on Soultrain in the beginning. She had a lot of the dancers, particularly the female ones, who did not like her. They thought that she didn't belong there, that she was being intrusive because she was Asian. Thought she was getting too much screen time, trying to take over. So, I mean, again, but that's how people are. That's just people for you. People get into jealousy, get into conflict. That's just how it goes, unfortunately. But by the mid 80s, hip hop and rap began to really become more and more prominent within music. Now, of course, the very first rap song was Rapper's Delight back in 1979, done by the Sugar Hill Gang, which they performed this show on Soultrain in 1979. By 1983, 84, you began to see even more rap artists making, strides. Curtis Blow, one of my favorites from back in those days, made his debut on Soultrain in, I believe, 1984. This is in the documentary I mentioned about the hippest trip in America. Don, not a fan of rap, not a fan of hip hop. He did not like it at all. But again, he had to move along and progress with the times musically. And so we had to have the hip hop and rap artist, come on Soultrain, because the dancers wanted to, have the hip hop artist on there so that the viewers. So Curtis Blow went on Soultrain. He was so excited to be on Soultrain. He watched it growing up. It was a big, big deal, big honor to make it on Soultrain. You had made it. You made the Soultrain. You had made it, But Don was, in my opinion, especially as time went on, his interviews were kind of cringe-worthy. I mean, some of the interviews he did were very good, but it really depended upon who he was interviewing. If he was interviewing someone like, let's say, David Ruffin, the interviews he did with someone like David Ruffin, those went over very well. But if he interviewed somebody like, let's say, Curtis Blow, didn't go over very well. Don said something to Curtis Blow in regard to he didn't understand the music, he understand what he was doing, I can't remember his comments verbatim. But Curtis Blow said he was and you could look at him and tell he was really hurt by what Don said to him. He said in the documentary that he was so disappointed by what Don said to him. He was so hurt. He was crushed by what Don said to him. But Don he was not the best at interviewing certain artists. Other people he'd interview who would come on the show, like he did a great job with. There were also artists, actors who would come on Soultrain. They didn't come to perform, but they would just stop by and he would interview them. He did those interviews very well. But, I mean, when it came to, like I said, the hip-hop artists and some of the artists who were younger, he struggled. He really did. That was very obvious. Some of the interviews that I watched, back then I was cringing. And I still cringe today when I watch them on YouTube. But Public Enemy was on Soultrain, Salt and Pepper, the Fat Boys, Run DMC. And you could tell that he was just not feeling it. But I mean, again, he had no choice. He had to, he had to stay hip with the times. Speaking of the times, by the early 1990s, Soultrain began to face stiff competition from other shows like, what is it called? I didn't watch the show. My sister loved it. MTV Raps. I think that was the name of the show. But there were other shows that were coming along that were more hip and that were solely more devoted to hip hop than Soul Train was, more involved in the rap scene. And they began to kind of cut into Soul Train's popularity. So by 1992, 1993, I think what really did it, and this is rumored, this is not factual, it's a rumor. In Living Color was on by that time. And they did a skit in around 1992. It's on YouTube if you want to see it. They did a skit called Old Train. And they were pretty much making fun of Soul Train, which I thought was just really disrespectful. I saw it at the time. I didn't like it. I didn't think it was funny. And I think that Don took that skit really to heart. I think that he was really hurt and insulted by that skit. Because the following year in 1993, he stepped down from hosting Soul Train. And I mean, he remained involved in Soul Train behind the scenes along with his son, Tony, but he didn't want to host anymore. I think that skit and then the fact that he just felt really out of touch with the music because, I mean, rap hit its stride in the 90s. Rap was, in my opinion, hip-hop rap was at its best in the 1990s. That's when it was at its peak, And he just really couldn't relate to it. He couldn't relate to the changes in music, the changes not only with rap, but in R&B. And I think he just really felt outdated. And so he decided to step down. He stepped down, I believe, that summer of 1993. Now, I kept watching Soul Train, but what they did after Don stepped down was they had a revolving door of hosts. Each week they'd have a different host. And I just had trouble with that format. I mean, I struggled with, my sister was fine with it, but I just couldn't adapt to it. I couldn't adjust to it. So I gradually began to watch Soul Train less and less, and then I stopped watching altogether. She kept watching, of course. She watched it, all the way through. That's when, somewhere in the 90s, is when they got Shamar Moore, who was also on The Young and the Restless, to be host of Soul Train. Now, I've seen some clips of Shamar Moore hosting Soul Train. He did a great job. He was really good. He was the perfect host, I think, for that show because Shamar Moore is around my age. So he was in his mid-20s when he was hosting. So he was really in tune with the current music of the day. And so he really knew he was getting out there. He danced with the dancers. And so he really was a good host for Soul Train. I'm not sure how long he did it, but he did step down because I think he just had a lot, too much with both The Young and the Restless and then Soul Train. And then he left The Young and the Restless and then he went back. And then he began to try to, kind of look at doing things outside of The Young and the Restless. So he had a lot going on. So, he did step aside as well. And they went back to the revolving door of hosts. I think they did get another host. I cannot remember his name. But they did, keep the revolving door there for a while. Now, interestingly enough, as I said, I stopped watching Soul Train. But I did start back to watch Soul Train around 2004, 2005. Soul Train by that point, and it really saddens me to get off into this, the ratings really did begin to decline. By that point, there were not as many dancers on Soul Train. You did still have, the musical artists. It was still an honor to go on Soul Train. I know Destiny's Child went on Soul Train. I think Alicia Keys, maybe. It was still an honor for the artists to go on Soul Train. Because Soul Train was phenomenal. Soul Train, like I said, it was like if you hit Soul Train, you had made it as an artist. And so it was still an honor to go on the show, but the ratings were just not what they once had been. And you still had the Soul Train Awards. The Soul Train Awards came into being in the mid-'80s, like 1985, 1986. They still exist today. It was an honor to go on Soultrain, the Soultrain Awards, to be a part of that, and to, win the Soultrain Award. But by that period in 2004, 2005, the ratings were just not like what they had been. Soultrain was on when I was watching it. I started back watching it again. My sister and I watched it together because she, of course, was still watching it. And I was in the room with her, and it was on, and something caught my attention. I don't remember what it was, what happened. Some song, I think, that I liked. They were playing it, and I watched the whole episode with her, and I began to watch it every week from that point. But it did sadden me to see that Soultrain was not what it once had been. It had become an afterthought to a certain extent. And because of that, in 2006, the show came to an end after a 35-year run. I think Soultrain is the second longest running TV show in syndication, followed by Entertainment Tonight holds that record because they've been on for 41 years. They made their debut in 1981. So Entertainment Tonight holds the record, and I believe Soultrain is right after that in second place. But Soultrain came to an end, a pretty quiet end, if I'm not mistaken. It came to an end pretty quietly in 2006, and Don Cornelius, though, received a star on the Walk of Fame. And next time I go to LA, I hope to go and see that because I haven't seen it. Also on the TV Land Awards, I did a whole episode about the TV Land Awards a couple weeks ago. Soultrain was honored in 2005, and Soultrain was still on the air at the time. That was an amazing tribute to Soultrain. You had Little Richard, Smokey Robinson, Maya, and I'm forgetting somebody. Stevie Wonder, though. Stevie Wonder closed out the tribute. It was amazing. Stevie Wonder had everybody on their feet when he did Superstition. It should still be on YouTube, I hope. Of course, the TV Land Awards are also available on DVD individually. You can, if you want to actually buy that particular TV Land Awards ceremony, you can get that individually. Just look for the 2005 version. You could actually buy it. But hopefully the Soultrain tribute is still on YouTube. I hope so, because that was wonderful. It was great. Some of the dancers were back for it. And of course, Don was there himself. It was great. It was absolutely wonderful. So Don, of course, continued. Don was a pioneer, of course, a legend. And he was still, out there receiving awards, and he would attend ceremonies and galas. And, he was still was a big draw within the business. Don, however, was going through a lot of personal struggles of his own in the latter years of his life. He remarried. I believe he married this was his third wife. And the marriage was very volatile, very contentious. Don was arrested for domestic abuse, and I believe 2008. That made headlines. His wife called the cops on him. They had an altercation. She called the police, and he was arrested. By 2011, 2012, Don was really not in a good place. Don had a lot going on with his health. There have been so many reports as to exactly what was going on in regard to Don's health. He was having seizures, very severe, intense seizures. Probably, no doubt, relating back to the brain operation that he had back in the early 80s. But he was reported as having Parkinson's disease, having dementia. He was not very well off financially. Now, you would think that Don Cornelius was really a very, very wealthy, well-to-do man. I mean, he wasn't broke, but he did not have the money that he should have had. Considering the fact that Soultrain was so successful and so profitable and so lucrative during its run, you would have just assumed, as I did, that Don was doing very, very well financially, that he was a very, 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 very rich man. But he was really struggling financially. I'm not sure if he made bad business decisions or bad investments. I'm not sure if it was the fact that his lifestyle was, too wealthy for the money that he had. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it was the fact he was trying to hold on to, this new younger wife that he had. I'm not really sure, but Don was not doing very well financially. So he was really struggling. He was in the middle of divorce from her. He was trying to make sure that he kept her hands off his money. So he was not in a good place in his life, emotionally, financially, psychologically, physically. So he was very, very, really struggling. And on February the 1st, 2012, around 3 in the morning, Don called his son, Tony. And he told him that he was just tired. And he told him he was just tired. So around 3:30 that morning, he took his gun, put it to his head, and he pulled the trigger. He took his own life. He was 75 years old. My sister's the one who told me about Don Cornelius's death. And I can't tell you how absolutely stunned and devastated we both were. I really took Don Cornelius's passing very, very hard. Because this was someone that I watched on TV for 18 years of my life every week. From the ages of 4 to 22, I watched this man on TV week after week after week after week. And so, we don't know celebrities. Well, I guess some people do, But, most of us, we don't know the celebrities that we watch on TV. The celebrities whose music we enjoy, the celebrities who we watch, we go to the movies to see on the screen. We don't know these people personally. We don't. But we do develop a connection with them. We develop a relationship with them. That's why when they pass away, it hits you so hard. Now, there are people, you didn't know them, and you know them personally. But, sometimes, you believe it or not, sometimes you can develop a relationship with a celebrity. You can develop a closeness to a celebrity, to a performer, an entertainer that you didn't develop with someone that you knew in person, in your real life, a relative or a friend. That's just how it happens. And when I found out about, not only did Don Cornelius die, but he took his own life, which made it even sadder to me, I was absolutely heartbroken. Every February 1st, I think about Don. Every February the 1st, I think of Don Cornelius. That date is seared in my memory. Don Cornelius' death sent shockwaves throughout the country. I remember that every national newscast that night paid tribute to Don Cornelius. There were tributes and reflections, outpourings nationwide to Don. So I remember that I was furious at People Magazine, though. I wrote People Magazine a letter, and I sent them an email, because they only mentioned him. They have that section where they mention celebrities who pass away. They have that people who, that got married, they got divorced, they passed away. That's where they had Don Cornelius. They didn't even give him an article in their magazine, and I was livid. So I wrote them a letter, and I told them how they really dropped the ball. And, I had to say something, because, Don Cornelius, again, did so much for entertainment and for Black music and for music in general, for the Black community. And you didn't have the decency to give this man proper tribute in your little stupid magazine? Yeah, that was something that I went off on them about. Have no regrets about it. But Don Cornelius' legacy and the legacy of Soultrain remain intact, and they always will. And interestingly enough, and this is something that still surprises me to this day when I think about it, just 2 months later, Dick Clark passed away. I believe Dick Clark, I think he was 82, I think. But he passed away in April of 2012. Unbelievable, because Soultrain and American Bandstand, those were fixtures for so many of us. So many Gen Xers, boomers too. Watch Soultrain and American Bandstand every Saturday. And it's not about generations either. I'm just saying that, they were fixtures on TV every weekend. Every Saturday, Soultrain and American Bandstand. There were dancers, like I said, who danced on both shows. And yeah, there was a competition between the two of them. And to think that they would pass only 2 months apart still boggles my mind. But Don Cornelius, again, a legend, a trailblazer, a phenomenon, someone that I am very grateful to. Thank God for Don Cornelius and for the vision of Soultrain, because Soultrain is still a show I enjoy. I love going over to YouTube and looking at clips of Soultrain. I love doing that. And I think there's a DVD collection of Soultrain, if I'm not mistaken. You can definitely check Amazon for that. But I believe it was released some years ago. I don't think it's full episodes. I think it's clips throughout the years. I got full episodes of Soultrain some years back because at one point Soultrain was not being shown at all in the U.S., but it was being shown in Japan. And I searched and dug around, and I found a contact who had Soultrain episodes, full episodes that he'd gotten and taped, from Japan. And so I got like about 40 VHS video cassette tapes of Soultrain, full episodes, from the early 70s through the early 90s. For example, there'd be an episode from 1972, then there'd be one from 1987. And so, we would watch those, and the commercials were intact. It was great. I still have the videos. I also got American Bandstand videos too, by the way. I got a collection of American Bandstand videos because they were, American Bandstand was being shown on VH1. The episodes were split. Instead of them being the full hour, they were split into 30-minute increments. So I got episodes of Bandstand as well. I still have my Bandstand collection as well as my Soultrain collection. And those, of course, were, so much fun to acquire. And I'm so just glad to have them in my possession. But Soultrain was being shown on Centric some years ago. I'm not sure if it's being shown on any TV network today. But of course, you can always, again, head over to YouTube because YouTube has great episodes of Soultrain, great clips from episodes of Soultrain. Those are fun to watch. There's a video actually on YouTube where you can hear all of the different theme songs of Soultrain, I believe all the way from 1971 to 2006. That is an awesome video. I definitely recommend you go check that out, because it has every single Soultrain theme song included. That is a lot of fun to watch, so I would definitely recommend checking that out. There's a Soultrain book that my sister bought me for my birthday a couple years ago. It's huge. It's one of those coffee table books, if you will. It's enormously big, enormously thick, great pictures. Check that out. So there's lots of Soultrain, stuff out there that you can take advantage of. You can buy, go check out YouTube, of course, go look at Amazon, go check out eBay. There's lots of stuff you can buy out there. There are Soultrain compilations on DVD that you can buy, on CD that you can buy. There's lots of good stuff out there. So, Soultrain still, not forgotten, still very reverenced, not only within in the African American community, but also just within music, period. Soultrain still very much beloved, still very respected, very honored. And it was my honor to do this episode about Soultrain because I loved watching Soultrain growing up. I saw an episode that Jasmine Guy appeared in the other night. Jasmine Guy, of course, she was Whitley from A Different World, embarked upon a music career. She released an album in 1991, and she made her debut on Soultrain. And during the interview, and that was a good interview, Don did a great job interviewing her. She said before the interview ended that it was such an honor for her to be on Soultrain because she grew up watching it, and it was just an honor and a thrill to be there. And it is an honor and a thrill for me to have been able to have done this episode about Soultrain and shared not only the history of the show, but also my own personal experiences of having watched it and enjoyed it through the years and how I'm still enjoying it today in 2022. So that's going to wrap up this episode of Two Sisters and a TV. I want to thank you so much for your time and for listening. And again, go on over there and check out as much Soultrain stuff as you can on YouTube. You definitely will have a lot of fun with that. And in the words of Don Cornelius, I wish you all love, peace, and soul.